In recent days, Marvel released their trailer for their newest projects like The Marvels, which look like the typical formula, and their television series that they're going to produce known as Secret Invasion, and by the looks of things, they might take an actual serious look at Marvel this time. But this thought also got me extremely worried, because it comes too late amid a massive shakeup within the company itself. Because of course Phase 5 hasn't had the best of starts with the mediocrity of Ant-Man trying to set up things in the worst possible way, followed up by a phase that had no real identity whatsoever with its movies, especially their planned multiverse arc. And it's not the multiverse that concerns me, cause we already had such great films that featured the concept, but it's more what they have tried to done that otherwise affects that. Because sure, this recent Secret Invasion might present things more darker and serious than the rest, but it's a fact that still needs to be seen from the oversaturated comedy that Marvel has been on, to do things more safe than ever before, being dragged down in Phase 4 as a whole with their constant barrage of films and TV shows that wore people out. And when you take that constant years of hype that has turned into disappointment to factor everything in, the picture itself doesn't look very great for its future. Ever since Endgame, it has always been a great challenge for them to hold things together, where of course, as most expected, it is hard to come back from such a successful conclusion to years of built films, where you would want to stop here where you can only get something that would be half as good as what you already got, which is literally the case of what is happening now. There has been no great Marvel film other than the likes of Spider-Man in my opinion, but that suffices enough for its overall story that they have been driving, where everything just lacks from story to CGI. They really want to push things harder in quantity than ever before without any care for the stories, and they didn't realize that this would make everything suffer as a result, because only 3 major stories really tied into the main theme of the multiverse in Phase 4, which is really confusing considering that you had the entire Infinity Saga tied back in with each other in some varying significance and quality, where no matter what exactly happened, you knew exactly what you were getting into, and that paid off eventually back in Infinity War and Endgame, where even now with their multiple TV series, every single piece of media feels separate from each other or whatnot, not connecting to the main message in any way, making it hard to believe that all of these events that happen really take place in the same show or moment. Yes, they might make the occasional drop or reference to another character or property, but that just isn't enough when their stories lack overall meaning anymore. It also didn't help the last time I talked about Marvel was their apparent hero problem, the ones that become more unlikable and unenjoyable for the audience, berating others and whatnot. Like the prime examples of casting a newer actor for Cassie Lang did not work in the slightest. Like it didn't make any sense, and they proved that what they did was virtually wrong. No offense to the actress herself, but she did not fit in the character, who is predominantly young for the most part of her time in the MCU and the daughter of Scott Lang, who now tries to live up to the next generation, where she proves she is incapable of inheriting that. They made no effort whatsoever to add the time where they can be properly explored to understand more about why the way they are, and it is why they are suffering as bad as a result. And the thing about this is that it doesn't have to be this way. They had the success from before, so why are they doing this right now where it clearly lacks the quality it should expect to have? The ideas that Phase 4 mostly showed promise, but it all failed towards executing their overall ideas. Originally at first, I loved the explosion of Disney Plus series into the fold, where I believe the stories of these very well can be told better in this format over the longer periods of time and not having to overcrowd the same crap every year in the movie theater and what was already accomplished before. At the time where most feel that Endgame was the real last high point of watching Marvel movies or whatnot because we wanted something new. But over time, they just demonstrated their ability to screw all of that up, with the wrong concepts being shown to the audience, where most of them could have worked better as a singular one-off movie rather than a series, or vice versa in The Eternals. Films like The Eternals, in my opinion, were a big disgrace for Marvel, knowing everything that they have built up for teams like the Avengers and the Guardians in the past. This is a film that dives right into and gives no time to explore the team or explain the large concepts they have with the Celestials and whatnot, leaving more questions than answers by the end of the film. It's no mistake that this is one of the worst received Marvel movies as of today because of how bad it did it. Like, this is the one that would have worked better as a series rather than a movie because how many they have where we don't know most of their stories. We don't know what the others' backgrounds are like because we cut back and forth between these multiple time periods of history and how they shaped human history in those times and whatnot, really doing a poor job explaining why they couldn't interfere in otherworldly threats, especially including the Avengers needing help, because if you understood the context between Thanos was doing and the Celestial Plan, and the fact that he is the son of Eternal himself doesn't really make sense at all unless they had some sort of understanding about what was going to happen. Like Cersei says in this scene that this is the way things must be, but it doesn't really make any sense if the Celestial Arishem foresaw Thanos ultimately failing, where they were all changed by that journey to stop the Celestial plans from being birthed. And then again, you have the effect of the Celestial popping out of the earth that was wasn't actually explained in any other MCU productions up to this point otherwise. They said it would be explained later or added onto, but it really doesn't make sense right now, or to do that later when you have this time frame affecting by the events of this very film and no one actually gives two shits to what is actually happening in the world anymore, like in a series like She-Hulk. No one knows the coming threats and they don't even actually care about it. The Eternals is a poor movie that tries to be big but fails in the smallest ways possible. Fleshing it out in the series would have actually made this more tolerable or great, but they didn't do that. Like, they didn't make their long boring series into a film. Instead, it had too much filler and nothing of substance to add. And then, like I said at the very beginning, you have this overload into comedy. Nothing in Marvel can go without making the most insanely mediocre jokes you could ever see that really takes you out of the moment. And this is exemplified in films like Thor Love and Thunder, taking the comedy elements of Ragnarok to a level of unenjoyability and destruction that I have ever seen. Like, it just doesn't make sense for the character like Jane and Thor to act this way when in the past they have shown differently. Of course, Thor has developed over time and his comedy elements certainly makes him more enjoyable, but not to the extent that makes him a jokester at all possibilities imaginable in this film. The most serious scenes in this very movie cannot go without having comedic elements to it, and the only serious character in the entire film is Gore, who dies at the very end. Everything that showed promise was once again eliminated on the spot, and it was really highlighted by the various deleted scenes that showed things like Thor's interaction with Zeus, which would have made the journey a lot more better and flesh out the new gods that they introduced in this film instead of the one-off jokes that are meant to set up some random fight that we would never see, like what happened with the original Mordo or whatnot. It's a mainly useless film where they were going to build the mighty Thor in Jane or whatever, but they just kill her off in the end in the swan song or whatever, not to continue telling Thor in this lame ass way. I just don't really like anything about this film overall, and I continue to get pissed whenever I see these screaming goats. Like, if you laugh at this, in my eyes you are officially an elder geese to me, because this is a continuation of Marvel and Disney's usage of outdated memes that are 20 years old now and whatnot. Just like how you can look at films like Ralph Breaks the Internet now and cringe at all of the references and destruction they do to the internet as it progressively gets so outdated and unenjoyable as a movie could get, compared to the original one that they did. The also notable thing about this movie is how everything looks fake. I mean, discluding the new Asgard, the whole entire movie takes place on like a green screen set, very obviously, even more so than Ragnarok was, and it's really jarring. Like, this is the movie where you can see their overblown, overworked use of CGI that distracts you from wondering if the universe was ever real like from before. The production quality looks like if a Disney Channel series had a bigger budget instead of an actual movie, and I really don't understand that. Increasing the quantity of everything should not make sense on these people who work on this and the misguided directions of the series, because in other movies like Multiverse of Madness, although times it was more decent in animation quality, it still lacks something great from its story, sidelining the main character to probably its villain in another big hero known as Wanda, being the Scarlet Witch, who had her own series to explain this instead, where I just felt let down by this movie even if it was directed by the likes of Sam Raimi, and I can feel his style in some distinct shots, but overall it still feels like someone else has always been at the wheel controlling things, mitigating any great direction that this movie could have had in the beginning and ruining some of the unanswered questions that we have gotten to this very point. There is just so much about this film that could have been done that No Way Home actually did better. Granted, the characters in that film were put for nostalgic reasons, but it was still more enjoyable and it represented the multiverse on a greater scale than killing off the second-rate Avenger team known as the Illuminati because the smartest man alive actually turned out to be the dumbest. Another aspect to be hated is actually America Chavez. Not the character herself, but what they do with her. They use her mainly as a plot point and we do not get much from her other than she's the one who can travel across the multiverse and nothing else is there to be added. Very stupid in my opinion if you ask me. I don't know much about her comics or whatnot, but what I don't like is how they just use her in this movie that doesn't service her as a character. It just didn't feel right, especially when the movie sidelines its main star for Wanda or whatnot, not really exploring the consequences of Doctor Strange and its variants when Wanda was being focused on in her plot that came from her TV show. Like, I just don't get what exactly the main focus for any of the characters are when they don't actually provide it. Because I do like shows like Loki because they continue the side plots from Endgame and actually extend to the most important part of this new saga in the multiverse, but they end up not mattering when the other shows prove how useless that they actually are, like they don't have an overall direction to them. I just don't like most of the new character direction that derives itself from newer versions of heroes that we already know too. Yes, the comics have that, but I just don't know how general audiences are going to fully commit to seeing a separate version of a character like Captain America who you already identify strongly with someone else at this time, and not using a new one to make it more interesting instead of increasingly formulaic, which is what Marvel actually is at this point, and why trailers like Secret Invasion are so deceptive to how it would actually turn out. Because the recent Marvel's trailers show a movie that is designed more like a Disney Plus show in the form of a movie, and it really doesn't look good. I mean, I didn't think it was bad, like it could be a fun adventure, but you know the major characters in the film were introduced in Disney Plus shows, and the style and the tone seemed like something that wouldn't warrant the movie quality that I would expect from Marvel, and also leaning heavily once again into its comedy aspects, which is what Marvel likes to do nowadays, and not tone it down to a degree that is more enjoyable, appealing to most audiences with the most standard humor imaginable, and I really hate it. I just want more of the consistency that I used to get from Marvel, and they are not giving it to me anymore. I mean, I will say with projects like Black Panther, it suffices enough to say the least, where it acts more like your typical generic Marvel movie that the previous phases had, which is much more better than the rest, but still lacks considering it is carried under the weight of Chadwick Boseman's death. The characters really are going off dealing with the Black Panther's death, and it doesn't really focus on one main character, especially Shuri would be the main focus, where in this instance I don't know what the ending actually means for Wakanda and whatnot. Where finally we move back to things like She-Hulk, which actually proves that they don't understand what exactly they are doing. This is a series that was meant to be a comedy, which doesn't work in the slightest when once again the entire MCU by itself is a comedy, and you rarely have projects that take itself seriously anymore, presenting the same issue I talked about previously, having the unlikable protagonist with no traits that makes me want to root for her at all, and makes the hero act like an antagonist in her very own series. It's jarring to say the least that this shows an inability to focus on something grand and something great that they used to have, where I'm afraid this is the end of the road for them. Not entirely, because franchises of this scale, no matter what you think, are very far from dead anytime soon, because as long as people watch it, it would still continue to persist with the likes of Ant-Man, where although in Phase 5 has this rough start with a low box office compared to other Marvel films, it still has that interest that people would want to see and what they add to the universe and the multiverse of characters that we love. And all of these issues actually stem back to Endgame, where the film by itself is not very good looking back on it more often as I see it, and I really believe this is what caused most of Marvel's primary formulaic concerns that they have. Sure, it was a good finale, but most of the concepts introduced don't make any sense and did a disservice to the characters that of course we saw continue in Endgame. It's all this muddled confusing and various subplots that just don't make sense overall towards the goal of what we're trying to get. Where in short, nothing does look good from recent to future Marvel, and I still remain to be worried about actually what comes next. Like, what exactly is Disney even offering anyone these days with mediocre content across the board? I cannot truly say about that, and the only thing that we can really hope for is that they can turn things around like in Secret Invasion. But that's a fact that keeps diminishing every day when I see things like the Marvels and the leaning into the same old comedy that we have been so used to now. So with that said, I'm all done, so goodbye.